Okay, I'm going to show you a few differences between these two assemblies. This one on the left here, this is the depo slash helix assembly. You can always tell with these things, but it says depo down there, or say helix if the brand is helix. It's actually the same assembly. They just branded under two different brands. This over here is the generic. This is kind of just one of the housing I had laying around. I'm not using this for anything, spare parts kind of thing. All right, so first things first. I dropped. Still going. First things first. These tabs up here, they're a little bit stronger on the depo, and by not much, but enough to notice a difference. I don't think either would break. Like if I'm pulling this is pretty tight, as opposed to that. I don't think either of them will really ever break on you unless you like accidentally drop it like this and it catches a table or something and snaps off. I've never had any one of these actually break off. So I wouldn't be worried about that at all. It is a difference though. This plastic, it's hard to tell here. The plastic is roughly the same thickness on both, but this one seems to like have a little more give in it. But like I'm pressing pretty good on this, and I mean it's not gonna break. It's just a different stiffness, I guess, even if the thickness is the same. But that's the difference on those. Next difference, these are the adjuster screws up here. This one right here, they both work the same way. There's like one gear on top and then a lateral or a horizontal gear here, and they mesh together, and you turn this screw up here and then this one turns down here, and that's kind of how they go. There's no real difference between the two other than, again, I think this plastic is a little less thick or a little less stiff than this plastic. It's not really an issue. Sometimes if you use the wrong screwdriver on this one, so this kind of is a difference. Like on this one, you can use a screwdriver the way it's designed. You can get a pretty small screwdriver in there that's too small, and then you can kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You can kind of strip the Phillips head on the inside there. This one is a little harder to do that because it's not as big of an opening, so you have to basically fit the right size screwdriver in. Otherwise, you can't get the screwdriver in at all. So these were a little better in that sense. Also, as you can see, they're a little thicker on top in that sense. I don't know if it's going to matter if I... So to give you an example, like this screwdriver, it'll fit in the mesh and I can turn the gear, but you can see there's a lot of room there. On this one, it fit in the mesh and turn the gear, but there's not quite as much room. Like I can't necessarily wiggle around my screwdriver quite as much. Like there's not as much space. So it's not a big deal, honestly, if you're careful and you use the right size screwdriver. Even if you strip the Phillips head one in these ones, you can still, I don't know if you can see, but it's actually a Phillips head in the bottom. This outside portion is a hex, so you can put a hex wrench in here too and use a hex wrench. And then even if you manage to strip that one, then you can use a socket over on here, because this is also a hex. So you can actually turn this 3 different ways if you want. And the same thing's true over here. You can do a Phillips on top, a hex on top, and then you can use a socket on this side over here. So the design is pretty similar in terms of these. I think these adjusters, this top gear is a little bit thicker or a little bit wider than this one over here. You can see the diameter sort of it compared to that one, which is a little bit better in my opinion. What that means though, if you want to think about it this way, since this one doesn't have as wide of a diameter, it takes more turns to move the assembly up and down on this one than it does on this one, if that makes sense. All right, so next difference would be some of the wiring, I think. So here's a turn signal socket. Again, I don't see this as an issue, but it is a difference, so I'll point it out. So that's about the thickness of those wires. These wires aren't like much thicker, but they are a little thicker. I don't think I can compare them next to each other, but there's kind of the difference in the wires. I mean, they're pretty close. Like they got to be 1 gauge off, maybe. Not a big deal on either one. A little thicker wires there. Next difference, if I look down in here, and this might be hard to see, you can see right back there, there's a little prong that goes that way across into that white socket there. That is made of metal. And over here, this one is made of plastic. And to give you an idea, I will show you They're both the same size, they're both the same shape. Pretty much, here's a metal one, here's a plastic one. They're really, realistically speaking, so they're both the same size, they're both the same shape. Realistically speaking, these don't break very often. In fact, it's been a couple years since I've had one of these break, I think. It's not like they haven't broken. I've got, if they ever do, I've got like 15 of them laying around. But that's the difference there too, metal versus plastic. Really, as soon as it's in the car, it would never take enough force. I've never had one of these break on a car. The only time these ever break are during shipping, when like somebody like throws the box or something, and then it's just not necessarily designed to be able to take all of that weight. It's been about, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years maybe since I've had one of these break, even in shipping. And I've never had one of these break on the car, and then I've never had one of these break either way because it's made of metal. Let's see, the other big difference. I'm going to go into the interior. This one's going to be a little tougher to see, but I'll show you anyway. If you look back up there towards the top, kind of like where inside the assembly, kind of where my finger is right there, give or take, right there, that is a plastic ball and socket. So the left-hand side pops into the right-hand side. It pops into the right-hand side, and that's how it stays. It kind of locks itself in. The socket kind of encompasses like over the ball and grasps it. And that's the upper mount that the upper adjuster screw is attached to. Over here, and again, this is not going to be super easy to see. It's a similar type system, except for it's essentially a prong and a sleeve. So basically, it's kind of like it just kind of inserts and it holds it in. It's rubber, the sleeve is rubber, and it kind of holds the prong by friction, and that's how the headlight assembly stays. One thing that this headlight has over here that this does not have at all, if that comes out, and they can both be over adjusted, so if you over adjust the screws on either, it'll pop out of the socket. If you over adjust on this one, it's not as easy to get back in place as on this one, because this one, and again this will be tougher to see, this one actually has, I don't know if you can see that entire white bar that goes from the top to the bottom. You can actually reach your hand in there, and it's not the easiest thing to do, or it's not like super easy, but it's much easier than the other one. You can reach in there with your hand, and you can pull on that. Like you can get grasping. You could pull that whole reflector assembly up here. You could pull that back and forth with that. Over here, to get that sleeve back in, it's easier to get it back in because again, it's just a rubber sleeve and a prong as opposed to a socket. But on this one, you have to pull on something else. So you'd have to like grab over here and rotate it back in, or take the turn signal out and kind of pull on the turn signal to pull it back in or something like that. So it's a little different. This one's easier to pull in the sense that it doesn't require as much force to go backwards. This one's easier to pull in the sense that there's a dedicated bar there that helps you pull in and achieve the extra force that you need. And that's really, realistically, those are the only significant differences between the two headlights. Again, with some of these things, the wires might be a little thicker over here, but that's really it. These things are, these latches are probably a little better on these, but I don't think it's like that's the thickness of those, and that's the thickness of that. So it's not really a significant thing. Like as long as it latches on, it latches on. And that's really it. Those are the differences. These are the ones that came, by the way, today. And as you recall, I think we said initially that you were going to not be using the fog lights. So just note that if you do decide to go with these ones, that these don't have the fog lights. Oddly enough, they have the wiring inside for the fog lights, but they don't actually have the housing, which is pretty common because they have the wiring harness manufactured, separate of the headlight, and it's just easier probably for them to just make them all the same. But there you go. Actually, one last difference. I think these clips up top, they're going to be a little stronger. But again, I've never had an issue with clips coming off of these ones. So those are the differences, and there you go. Hope it helps.